going to talk about evaluating resources. So as you collect your sources of information, you need to evaluate the quality of the provider of the information as well as its usefulness toward your research. Now, this is usually something people do without even thinking about, at least the second half. Is it useful for your research? When we look at a list of book titles or article titles, immediately you read the titles and you think, yes, no, is this going to help me? I mean, that's an evaluation of the material, and you're doing it almost instinctively, automatically, without even thinking. But it's evaluating the quality of the provider of the information that is trickier, and that's where we have to think about it, and we have to make a little bit more of an educated guess, and we have to look for some clues to see what will be useful. Now, who decides what the quality of the information is? You are ultimately responsible, but when it comes to different source types, for example, books, things that we own in our library, reference books, you have maybe a little bit less responsibility for evaluating those materials because one of our librarians has selected that material, maybe read some book reviews by other quality control people, other people who are knowledgeable. And so those items don't just show up in our library randomly. We've done some sort of at least mild evaluation, so you know that these aren't completely off the beaten path. You don't need to worry too much, but you still have to apply all the evaluation criteria to books just to make sure you're really getting what you need. Then when it comes to periodicals, magazines, newspapers, journal articles, this is going to take a little more close viewing. Yes, it's important to recognize the difference between a scholarly writing or trade journalism. We're going to talk about that, different types of periodicals. And even though we've selected something for our library, we selected maybe a journal or magazine in the sense that we typically want the quality of the information is typically good, but each issue can vary a little bit. Some of it can be better than others, better written, better researched, all that. So when it comes to periodical articles, you're going to have to be more critical of that. You're going to have to be more concerned. And then when it comes to internet sources, this is where your most critical evaluation is going to apply. Typically, there is absolutely no filter between what someone writes or publishes on the internet and what you see on your computer screen. Someone doesn't write a website and then send it to an editor who checks the quality and then they send it to a review board or anything along those lines. These are going to be things that you have to think of. You're going to have to be that critical thinker, that critical reviewer. And so there are some things published on the internet that have been through a review process, but not everything, and it's not that common. So you really have to be that person. You have to be that reviewer. So it's important to evaluate your resources as you go along. So what type of source are you looking at? We're going to need to know what kinds of sources. You need to look at the different types of sources that are out there, and you need to understand the differences. Primary and secondary sources. So that's the first thing you want to look at. What is the difference between a primary source and a secondary source? A primary source. This is an actual account of events, a diary, a journal, like somebody's been keeping track of an event in a journal, sort of like a diary. Research experiment, somebody who actually performed an experiment. They did the research, they're telling you about it, what they did. Something written by a person, if you're researching an author, something that was written by Maya Angelou is a first, primary account of her thoughts, that kind of thing. The definition from Oxford English Dictionary: primary, occurring or existing first in a sequence of events, belonging to the beginning or earliest stages of something, first in time. So this is the first account of things, something that's primary source. Historical documents are great. The original documentation of something. Primary sources. So what would be a secondary source then? This is going to be a discussion of a primary source. An analysis, a critique, a commentary about something, something written about someone. So if I write something about Maya Angelou, then that's a secondary source about her. What she's written about herself, that's first account. That's a primary source, but what I'm writing is a secondary source. If you read something in the newspaper about a study that happened, the newspaper isn't the primary source about that study. They're reporting news about something else that happened. So they're a secondary source. So you need to think, do I need a primary source or a secondary source? And then popular and scholarly sources. You need to know the difference between those two as well. Popular sources. General audiences, things that are less technical. The language is not as technical. It's the explanations are more written for general readers. Newspaper is a popular source. Things that are expected to be accessed by a lot of readers. You aren't expected to have any expertise in the area. Something like Time Magazine, Newsweek, Psychology Today. These are popular sources. These are meant to be accessible to many, many people, whether or not you know anything about a topic. On the other hand, then, are scholarly sources. These are going to be your scholarly journals. Maybe your instructor will say, I want you to use a scholarly journal for this, or a scholarly source. Or they might say they want you to use a peer-reviewed source. Maybe peer-reviewed, blind-reviewed, refereed. Those are different ways of sort of getting at the same idea. Scholarly sources are in-depth accounts. They're much more thorough. These are going to be studies, experiments, surveys, things that are about the actual research that was done. So let's talk a minute about the peer review process. When an article is written and submit to a scholarly journal, it's probably written by a researcher, and they submit it, and then it goes through a peer review process. And what the journal does when they get that, rather than just reading it and saying, hey, this seems really interesting, I bet we're going to sell a lot of issues if we publish this, what they're going to be doing is they're going to send it out to other people in the same field of study. So if you're a biologist and you submit a biology article, you're going to they'll send it to other people in that same field of biology, that same area, and have them review it. They want to make sure that you did the study right, that you used enough samples to make sure it's valid, that you whatever's appropriate for the type of study it was. And they're going to review the article and make sure it's been done well, it's well written, it's well researched, etc. And then they'll send it back. There's usually a little back and forth and corrections and whatnot. And then they'll say, yes, it's approved for publication. Or they'll say, no, we're not going to publish this because it's not sound research. That does happen. So this is the process that's referred to when someone says peer-reviewed. So your instructor might say, I want you to use scholarly sources for your paper, or they might just say peer-reviewed. So that's what the scholarly source is all about. For example, Psychological Bulletin is a scholarly source. Journal of Wildlife Management is a scholarly source. Science is a scholarly source. These are all different types of scholarly journals. In Part 2, we'll talk about criteria for evaluating your resources.